Greetings and welcome to the latest installment of the Senturus Knowledge Series. Today we'll be presenting on the topic of connecting to and prepping data for Power BI. Specifically, we'll be covering 4 different ways you can connect to and prepare your data in Power BI, discussing some of the pros, the cons, and providing demonstrations of each method. Our agenda today, after a quick introduction, I'll walk you through an overview of Power BI. We'll talk about the different query methods and some of the trade-offs and considerations, and along with demonstrations, as well as sort of where you fall on the BI maturity curve and kind of high-level use cases. And then we'll cover some, we'll do a quick Senturus overview for those of you who are unfamiliar, but we encourage you to please stick around for the full duration as we give you some great additional, almost entirely free resources at the end. And we cover the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So by way of introduction, my name is Mike Weinhauer. I am the Director of Training and Content here at Senturus. I've been building, selling, and designing analytics solutions for the entirety of my 25+ year career, the last 5+ of which have been spent with Senturus. And I've worked with Cognos and Oracle, as well as Tableau and Power BI. So I know enough to hopefully be dangerous and impart a little knowledge here. Before we jump into the presentation, we always like to get our finger on the pulse of our attendees and our audience. And the first poll I'd like to launch here is ask the question, is your organization currently using Power BI Premium? And pretty straightforward. Yes, no, or you don't know. So you basically got the free version. If you're just using the desktop, you have Power BI Pro, just kind of the next tier up, and then Power BI Premium is the top tier with dedicated capacity and greater capabilities. Okay, great. And I'll share this. So we're at about 50% are not using Power BI Premium. About a third of you are, and another 20% don't know. So thank you very much for that. And then we have a second poll today asking, how do you connect to Power BI data currently? And this is a select all that apply. So do you import the data in? In other words, are you doing flat file dumps from another system and pulling those in, or are you importing from your data source? Are you doing direct queries to a transactional or operational system? Are you querying a data warehouse or SQL Server analysis services in some form? Are you using dataflows and or data sets? So it looks like almost 2/3 of you do import. That's interesting, although imports can take on a lot of different flavors. I'd be curious how many of those are flat file exports and how much of those are importing from one of the other sources we mentioned. Then half or so are doing direct query to some transactional system. That's interesting. And about half are doing data warehouse, SSAS, 20% using data flows, so that's kind of low, although not entirely surprising. And about half of you are using data sets. Great. So thank you. That's always interesting to kind of see, and hopefully interesting for you to see what your colleagues here on the call are doing. So first, a little bit of background in terms of Power BI for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the tool and the platform, if you will. And it really kind of comes out of the rise of self-service. And I guess what we're sort of doing today is following a journey, perhaps, of a young, eager analyst. And it's a bright person. They wash their hands frequently with warm soap and water and don't hoard toilet paper and get gouged for hand sanitizer. And hopefully they're not watching the stock market today. But they have business data sitting in a bunch of flat files, and they don't want to bother IT with any of this yet because of various reasons, things like resources, politics, or competence. And there's a lot to sort of figure out, and they want to figure out how to prepare the data, how to potentially store this data, land it somewhere, how to model it, then how do I create my reports and visualizations off of it, and ultimately, how do I share that? And then on top of that, how is that going to perform adequately? And then the linchpin here is, how do I do all that myself? And can one tool really do it all? And this used to be a very disjointed process wherein at least part of this was owned by IT. And on the backside here, the perhaps ETL and landing of the data. The modeling was yet another function. The visualization was still another, and generally sort of the deployment fell to maybe even another person. So you can kind of have these walls in place over here, and that's what led to the rise of tools like Power BI. And without going through this entire chart, this kind of gives you a brief history of, or rather a comprehensive history of all the Microsoft BI offerings. And if you sort of fast forward to 2010 here, you see three tools come into play: Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View, giving you the ability to prepare data, do self-service through Power Query, store and model, and do some self-service here in Power Pivot, and then Power View giving you some ability to do reports and dashboards. And then in 2012, we saw Microsoft come out with Analysis Services Tabular, which is their version of a columnar in-memory data store. So a very scalable, very high-performance data store. And Power BI came out in 2015 that really has over time integrated all of those four components into the desktop tool. So in other words, one tool can sort of do it all. And that integration's only gotten tighter over time, and it spans beyond just the platform to the Power BI service, or powerbi.com as we call it sometimes, into other areas like Visual Studio and the Power Platform in Azure. So what is Power BI? In a nutshell, it's a self-service analytics solution that allows you to prepare and present data in your organizations. And it provides those five essential functions. It provides a query engine. It provides an in-memory data storage repository. It allows you to do modeling. It provides a visualization tool and a deployment portal. And it's really a set of integrated tools ranging from desktop to Power BI service, report server, a mobile app, Power BI embedded, and data gateways, and Excel. And I'd argue really there are 6 functions that it covers here, because whereas those walls existed before between the data modeling and the ETL rather and the data modeling and the visualization, these tools really have broken that down and enabled this iterative capability where you can prototype rapidly in a tool like this, iron out the kinks, get your calculations and your business logic and everything, and then push those upstream for greater levels of reuse. So there's another really arrow in there that you could argue is a 6th concept. This one gives you, we're going to use this diagram heavily in this presentation, and apologize, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but in terms of the core concepts, architecture, and flow, we're going to start with Power BI Desktop, which consists of connectors that allow you to connect to multiple different types of data sources, and virtually any conceivable type of data source. And you can create queries that define how to extract and transform your data sources accessed via those connectors, and modeling capability that allows you to define tables, relationships, columns, and measures that you subsequently use in reports that present data from those data sets on one or more pages of visuals. Now, keep in mind that your data set in Power BI Desktop might just be the model, and you could be querying this live, or you do have the ability to import into a data set that is a Power BI tabular model built into Power BI Desktop. Then the workflow is generally to publish content out to powerbi.com, aka the Power BI service. And that consists of a number of different features, and some of which we'll cover today. So you have, going from left to right, you have data flows, which we'll cover, and they pull data from sources, actually perform transforms, and load them into Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud offering, and it's called Azure Data Lake Gen 2. So not my terminology there, so leave it to Microsoft to come up with a mouthful. We'll just call that Azure Data Lake Gen 2, or ADLG2. On top of that, you can publish either from desktop or create in powerbi.com against data flows or data sources data sets, which are published analysis ready models that are reusable and certifiable, and we're going to cover those as one of our methods. Then dashboards, of course, reports, same thing as here. They're data that get presented from data sets on one or more pages of visuals. Dashboards allow you to present visuals that get pinned from one or more reports on powerbi.com. And then the last component here are on-premise data gateways. So you can connect to cloud sources, or you can connect to on-premise data sources leveraging what they call the on-premises data gateway. So we'll refer to this diagram throughout. Now, there's always, when you're thinking of a method, and as we went from writing a blog on this to formalizing it in a webinar, it became clear that that 4 ways really became sort of 5 and could be 6 or more, and it really kind of is a spectrum here. So we try to touch upon the main ways and a couple permutations, and the method that you land on will always be kind of the sum or the net of various trade-offs and considerations. So you'll have various needs based upon your use case or your environment or certain limitations you have. So maybe you have a real-time scenario, or maybe latency is not so important. Do you have a need to only store that data once, or is it okay to have another copy of it? Is the data that you're reporting against, is it analysis ready, or is it more transactional or operational in nature? What are your cost constraints? What are your performance requirements? How much does this need to scale? Does your data reside on-prem or in the cloud, or does your solution need to reside on-prem or in the cloud? Do you have a governance requirement, or is agility the order of the day? And of course, security. And that's just, I'd say maybe not comprehensive, but it's kind of the short list here. So there's always trade-offs and considerations, and that's going to drive what you end up choosing. And those will change over time. And then before we get into the methods here, real quickly, Microsoft uses some definitions for their various query methods. And for purposes of this webinar, I'm generally referring to the query as it is executed by Power BI desktop, because these terms are used in different places in the Microsoft stack. So when I'm talking about it, I'll try to clarify that. But direct query refers to a live query to data that is modeled in Power BI. And that is separate and distinct from a live query, which is a live query from Power BI to pre-modeled data. So with a direct query, the model lives in Power BI. With a live query, the model lives somewhere else. It's either a data set, or it's been modeled in SQL Server Analysis Services, for example. So those are the 2 main ways you connect via live. So when you see that, import is when you're pulling that data from the source into a Power BI data model, into a tabular model that's used by Power BI. And then the last one here is sort of a hybrid. It's a composite or dual, where aggregate data gets pulled into an import, and then the query engine uses intelligence at runtime to determine if it can fulfill the query via the import, or if it's going to use direct query. All right, so hopefully that terminology and that background gives you a little foundation to work with. So, all right, so we're gonna get into option 1 here, and this is the direct connection to transactional data. Now, you are here in the diagram, right? You're operating in Power BI desktop. So this is kind of you're maybe new to Power BI, or you're doing a prototype, or you have a real-time data need. And the keys to this one are that transactional systems involve very large, generally very complex schemas. They're optimized for data input, like taking orders and doing manufacturing runs and things of that nature. They are not optimized for query performance. In fact, they're sort of diametrically opposed to it. They're in third normal form. You have orders in our demonstration, at least, orders is in 2 tables, and products exists in 3. And the challenges arise here are that while it's quick and dirty and you can get to it easily and get started quickly and maybe cheaply, there's a lot of modeling that it relies upon, and your transactional data doesn't have things like a time dimension or a geo dimension. There's a lack of history or change capture. There's no hierarchies, and it generally won't have all of the data, or doesn't always have all of the data that you need. So it's heavy on transformation and modeling. You have a low reuse, especially across different tool sets, right? If you use other tools in your organization, but it's great because your data is really fresh and it's good for operational purpose, and it doesn't require you moving data. So what does that look like if I drill into it a little more? Well, you're either doing a direct connect or an import from the transactional system into Power BI desktop, or in a lot of cases, we see people actually creating reports or flat file or Excel dumps out of that transactional system to be pulled into Power BI desktop. So let's take a look at what that might look like. And this is kind of the longest demo of all of them because we're not presuming a whole ton of knowledge with Power BI. So I want to give you a feel for what this is like. So I'm using the Microsoft AdventureWorks data set. So it's a sample company. And in this instance, I have about 70 tables in this ERP system. And it's very, it's third normal form and all that good stuff. And there's about 20 different views in here. So I've studied this, fortunately. So if you have the benefit of SQL Server Management Studio or something of that nature, then you're able to sort of, figure out what's going on with that schema and go to try to report off of it. So my first step here is to go and connect to my data, and I'm going to connect to my SQL Server database. I'm running this all locally for convenience, and you'll see my data connectivity mode. I have the ability to import that, or I can do a direct query. And I'm going to connect. It's going to bring up my available databases. And the first one I have here is the second one I have here is my OLTP schema. And you can see here, this would be sort of tricky to figure out potentially for somebody who was new to this. And this is a small one. Modern ERP systems have upwards of 30,000 tables. So you can imagine what that would be like. You're not even going to be able to browse those. And so what I'm going to do is a basic analysis and all these in the interest of time. And I'm going to pull in 3 different tables. I'm going to pull in the sales order detail information. I'm going to pull in customer information, and I'm going to pull in product information. And what I want to do, because this is, again, a transactional system, I need to model this in such a way that it's analysis friendly. I'm going to click transform data. And what this is going to do is it's going to issue some queries to bring me some preview data and bring me into Power Query Editor. And this is where I do my transforms. And you can see this is a very powerful environment. It allows me to do a lot of modeling of the data, like removing columns, removing rows, removing nulls, removing duplicates. I can fill data, I can pivot data. There's a ton of things I can do here. So bear with me while I do a little bit of modeling here. And I'm going to, for starters, my person address, in this case, is going to become my customers view. And what I'm going to do is Power BI does a nice job here of providing references to tables that it's linked to through referential integrity. And so what I can do is sort of get rid of the ones I don't want, and I don't have to explicitly pull those into my model. And I can just use this little expand icon, and it's going to let me go out and I can pick just the tables and columns that I want from that table. So I'm going to expand that out. So now my view contains my products table. It contains my address, and it contains some of my state information. So I've taken out columns that I don't want. I'm going to rename this to state name. And then my sales territory is snowflaked out to that table. So I'm actually going to pull in that information. So I get my region name. And I'm good to go. Okay, so I'm good with my sales. I'm going to do the same thing with my product table here. Call that products. And my product tables, there's about 20 or 30 tables. And what I want to do here for purposes of my analysis is I really want my product hierarchy. I want my product subcategory information, and I want my product category information. So I'm going to delete all these other references that I don't really want to kind of clean up this analysis. And then I'm going to expand the product information to include the product subcategory, and I'm going to include this link out to the product category. So that's going to expand out. I'm going to rename this name column to product subcategory. Get rid of this guy, and then I'm going to expand out my last one, my product category, and then I'm going to rename the product category. Great, so now I have all my product information, and then lastly, I am going to put in my sales orders. So I'm renaming this, and I'm going to expand sales orders to include my sales order header. So I'm kind of normalizing this information and using those table references to minimize the, to unify those into a single view and to make this sort of a nice little mini star schema, if you will. Okay, great. So now this has all my sales metric information, has a bunch of good information, and I'm more or less ready to start my analysis. And then the other thing I might do here is remembering that my my table here, my data does not have a time dimension. So right now I've really only got order date. And while Power BI does have some time intelligence, you may want to actually create some more, create some specific columns that do that. So I can add in a custom column here, for example, and I might want to enter in, I can call it order year. And here I'm going to actually, it gives me a little calculation viewer, so I can do year, and you'll see I get some type ahead functionality. And then when I put that in there, it's going to expect as an input one of the columns, and I can add in my order date. And it'll tell me no syntax errors have been created. And then I get an order year column that's going to extract the year out that I can use in my analysis. Okay, so once I've done that, and so you can imagine I go through this exercise and I pull in more and more tables and I do more and more modeling here, but you can tell this takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. So once I pull that in, it takes me back, it closes Power Query, takes me back into Power BI Desktop, and I now have my nice three little views here, which I now have to relate to each other. So I'm going to take my product ID from my products view, and I'm going to go ahead and join that up. It's going to give me a little preview, make sure that that looks, the relationship and the cardinality looks right. And then I want to join my address to, I'm going to use my ship to address ID here so I'll be reporting off the customer information will be based upon who I ship that information to. So I make sure the cardinality is correct, that relationship looks good. And then a couple other things here. I want to go through and my line total is a decimal number, but I want it to be formatted to be a currency. And I want it to be 2 decimal places. So these are the sort of things, again, that you have to do against transactional systems where that isn't handled for you, but I can change that in my model. And then finally, I'm ready to go ahead and create my visualization. So I can go out here, and I'm just going to create some basic visualizations here in the interest of time. So I can create a hierarchy. So for example, my product category hierarchy, and it automatically creates this visualization. I'm going to change that to matrix view, and then I'm going to go down to my sales orders. I'm going to grab my new order year column, and I'm going to throw that in the columns. And then I am going to throw my line total into the values. And there you go. So you can see I'm starting to get some data back. I can drill up and drill down on this. And if I want to do a geographic analysis of my customers and where they're buying that stuff, I can go state province code and drop that on country region code to create another hierarchy. And then I can throw that into my visualization. It's going to pull up a map. And to that, I will add my line totals. Right. And the nice thing about this is, I can see here's my numbers for North America, for example, and I can drill down on that and see what it looks like from a state level. So I've got a pretty nice looking little visualization here. But that took a fair bit of effort and a fair bit of time. So hopefully that gives you a sense for what Power BI is capable of, or sort of an intro to that. And keep in mind now that I can also add new data sources to this, right? This is a direct query. So this allows me to go in, if I wanted to pull in more data, I could actually add data to this. I could pull in a spreadsheet, of information or whatever I want it to do. So I have that ability with this design. So in summary, the pros to the direct connection are that it's real time. You don't have to copy your data. It's relatively low cost to get started, or very low cost to get started. It's pretty agile. I can kind of do what I want in that environment. As you saw, it's very powerful. There's a lot I can do in this tool, perhaps more than about any other tool out there. The cons can be the performance. Remember, that's a transactional system that you're running the business on, so you could have system impact on that. It does require a fair bit of effort to get that data into an analysis-ready format. And if I'm doing this at the file level, remember, if I'm in a company of many thousand people and a bunch of people are using Power BI, there could be a lot of people spending a lot of time creating these individual files. But hold your judgment on that, because we're going to cover some of the other methods here. And the data's point in time. You don't have history or trending or change data capture, as I mentioned before. So it's really ideal for smaller groups or teams, real-time use cases, and as well as prototypes. And so the methods that you have available to you to query that are direct queries. I showed you. You can do an import, or you can leverage that composite model. So that's kind of your beginner or starter level for from a maturity level. So now the next option is connecting to an EDW. Now, it's a better practice, and for purposes of this, we're defining it as anything other than directly hitting that transactional system. So it could be a proper EDW, a snapshot of the ERP or transactional system, an ODS, a data lake. Remember that your mileage level of performance and or modeling that you have to do can vary greatly. What I'm going to connect to here in this example is more of a, I'll call it a proper EDW, the AdventureWorks EDW. The benefits of an EDW is that they're really designed for analysis. However, they can still be big and complex in the sense of having hundreds or thousands of tables, and they won't always contain all the data you need, but it does have history, captures changes, and has nice time and geodims and hierarchies, and should generally perform well for queries. So there's less transformation and modeling required, but there is upfront cost in that. And then instead of doing the modeling here, you're doing it out in something like SQL Server integration services. So, sorry, I meant to dive into this specific mode. So here, your source systems, you're doing ETL, could be SQL Server integration services, could be Informatica or something else. You're landing that in another data source and then attaching to that via Power BI desktop. Now, keep in mind then you're really kind of pushing that work upstream. So there's some effort and cost around that, but you get the benefits of being able to reuse it. And just to give you a quick snapshot of what that looks like, this is Visual Studio and what the SSAS data flows look like to populate even our little AdventureWorks data warehouse. And this is the kind of thing that we help our customers with all the time. And just to give you a quick snapshot of what this looks like, this is just the SQL that's used to populate the product dimension in this example. So there's a whole bunch of, there's calculations in here, there's business logic that gets incorporated into this. So this is non-trivial, but there's huge business value to be had in terms of being able to make this analysis ready. So what does that look like from a Power BI perspective? So to do that, we're going to create a new file. And instead of connecting to my OLTP system, I have an enterprise data warehouse that I'm going to connect to. Sorry, I should have had this open before. I'm going to click on my Get Data. Go to my database. Log in. Again, I have the option of import or direct query because this is still just a relational database. And this time I'm going to pick my AdventureWorks data warehouse, and you'll see it's organized very differently. I've got a handful of views, but then I have about 15 or 20 express dimensions that I'm going to pick from. And I'm going to go ahead and pick some of those now. I'm going to grab my date, and I'm going to grab my products and my internet sales. So a much smaller number of tables in your data warehouse typically, and it's a little clearer kind of what I'm after. Nonetheless, though, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do some transformations because I still have a snowflaked product hierarchy, and some of my customer information I want to expand out too. So bear with me while I kind of bang this out. So same sort of exercise where I go in, this is Power Query, and I'm going to use these table references to expand out. I'm going to take out my French and Spanish, product category, and so now I have my product hierarchy like that. So that was probably, notice in Power Query too, it keeps track of all of your steps here, so I can sort of walk back in time and reorganize or change the settings for those if I haven't done it correctly, which is really nice. I have a proper date dimension, so I don't, somebody's already gone through that exercise of creating all those nice date calculations, and they're consistent with my organization. And then on the customer dimension, I am going to expand this one out to include more of the geo information. And I'm going to get rid of my French and Spanish so that I can do, you know, that map that I wanted to do. But compared to the transactional system that I was reporting off of before, there was a ton less modeling that took place in this particular example. So when I'm done with that, I'm going to then close and apply once again, and I'm going to be brought back into Power BI. And now I'm ready to create my model, right? And so there's already some primary foreign key relationships here. I have to reestablish these relationships because I changed them in Power Query. So I'm going to go and relate by my product key, check to make sure my relationships are okay. My customer, I am going to join my customer key. That's not right. Let's see. I'll pull up my finished one because I can't seem to remember what that join was right now. But you can see net of that, there's only a couple of joins that I have to do, and I'm ready to do my analysis. So as soon as this comes up, I'll build you the visualization and we will move on. It'd be a live demo if we didn't have some kind of snafu here. So you can see here that I have my, again, my visualization that I've built using the product categories, and I'll jump back to my model here real quickly so you can see my customer and geography DIMs, my proper date DIM, and my product DIM. So it's very easy for me to then go ahead and create this analysis and interact with it. So a lot less work and reuse across the organization. So jumping back to kind of the pros and cons of that, the pros are that it's pretty easy because the data is designed for analysis. It's also much more governed because to get into the EDW, there's a whole process that was gone through. So that ETL that I showed you in SSAS, it has been vetted and sanctioned and blessed by others in the organization. It's generally performant, it also scales, and you have great things like history, trends, data capture, and you get a higher level of reuse and ideally align business metrics. The cons of that are that there's usually a penalty in terms of latency. You got to wait for the data to get there. It takes time for those ETL jobs to run sometimes. The recency of the data may not be as fresh as with a real-time scenario. There is some cost associated with building that. It's not as agile because if you have metrics or changes in the business or the business logic, those have to be propagated from upstream. And again, you might not have all of the data that you need for your analysis. But again, the nice thing about this is in this scenario, I could go back into that Power BI workbook and I could add another data source to it. So EDWs in all their various permutations are really ideal for more medium to large enterprises and for more governed data needs. And again, the methods are you can do direct query, or you can do import, or you can leverage that composite dual model. So that's kind of the intermediate level. Now, a permutation of that, and that's why I said it was kind of 4+ methods, is that we see commonly used and is sort of a best practice, is instead of an EDW is connecting to an SSAS tabular model. Now, here, instead of doing ETL, you're using Visual Studio to build a tabular model in SQL Server Analysis Services, which is that columnar in-memory store, and then using Power BI Desktop to connect to that. So in this instance, what we're going to do is, I'm going to create a new one here, but I'm going to jump over to the internet sales here, and this is again in Visual Studio. So this is not necessarily for the faint of heart. This is not necessarily something that your analysts are going to do, but they're pulling in tables from my AdventureWorks data warehouse and pulling that in and defining KPIs and measures, and then deploying that out to a SQL Server Analysis Services in-memory store. So it's highly performant and easy to analyze. And I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go connect to that. And this time, for my database, I'm going to pick my SQL Server Analysis Services option. And I'm going to type in localhost again. And you'll see again, I have import, but the second option isn't direct query, it's connect live. And that's that live connection I was talking about. The key difference being that when I pick my internet sales, for example, it's doing that live connection. Here's all my dimensions and measures, and I'm ready to go. You'll notice I can't do any modeling against this, right? I can't change anything. There's no transforming that I can do. I can edit the data source settings, like point to the cube, but that modeling option is gone, the data view option is gone. I only have the visualization capabilities. So it's nice because I can go straight into actually creating the visualization. However, I'm limited by what has been modeled in the SSAS tabular model. So I'm just going to pull in some of this stuff to quick show you what this looks like. All right, so there's my interactive amount. Now the number's a little different because this has been pulled into a cube and it's looking specifically at the internet sales. But I can do all of the analysis that I wanted to do, right? I can look at my geography and I can go to, say, country region name and put in my sales amounts, right? And then you can see all my numbers here. So it is what it is, right? If this isn't formatted correctly or I wanted to do this a little differently, there isn't a lot I can do. I also cannot get data from this, so I can't go and add another data source to this analysis. So it's fast, it's performant, it's governed, but you sacrifice a little bit on the agility side. Now, if I did an import from that into Power BI, you could do some of that modeling and add other data sources, but that's not generally recommended for various reasons. So the pros there are very similar to EDW in that it's easy, it's designed for analysis, governed and performant, it scales. You can have things like your history and whatnot. The cons are, again, very similar, and you sacrifice a little bit on the agility side. So if your trade-offs are more better governance and performance, which you sacrifice a little bit of agility for. Again, ideally for medium to large enterprises and governed data needs. And the method is a live connection, or you could do an import, and the maturity level is sort of an intermediate level. All right, so now you've created some workbooks, you've connected to transactional sources, you're a pro modeler, you've connected to EDW or maybe an SSAS cube, but you're still living in the file world, but you want to deploy this and get this out into your organization more. Well, the next step, logical step here, is what we call a shared data set. So now you're going to be invoking and leveraging the Power BI service. And a data set is really the way to think about the data set as a fully modeled subject area that's ready for reporting, okay? And it's it's ready to go. It's kept up on PowerBI.com, and it's easy to leverage. So what I want to do here, and the easiest way to do this is just to use I want to use my LTP one here. And so I remember my first model against the OLTP system. And if I want to use this, all I have to do to create a data set is click the publish button. And this is going to, I'm already logged into PowerBI.com, and it's going to publish it up to the service. It's going to publish my content plus this data model. And in the interest of time, I'm actually going to jump up here so you can see AdventureWorks OLTP finished in my data sets. And what I can do is I can either access this via PowerBI.com. So I can go up here, and this is the PowerBI.com interface, or the Power BI report creation interface on the web. So it's a little tricky to grab this thing. But I can go and create visualizations here using that data set on the web, or I can go out and I can create, or I can access the content that was published when I went and published this. So I can either interact with this, I can secure it, I can share it. There's a bunch of things I can do with this, or I can leverage that data set. So the data set, there's nothing I can do with it. I just connect to it, and I'm off to the races. Now, if you're doing this from PowerBI.com, or sorry, from Power BI Desktop, what you're going to get is when you hit the Get Data button, is instead of picking a database or a flat file or whatever, you're going to pick the Power Platform option, and you're going to see a menu of options there. So you can see Power BI datasets and data flows. I pick Power BI datasets because I'm logged in. It doesn't prompt me. It stores my credentials for me. It's going to show me all the datasets I have ready to use for analysis. And you'll notice the important thing about these is that you have the ability now to promote and or certify those. And one of the big, the whole rise of these self-service tools, as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, kind of flipped the whole earlier IT-driven centralized reporting on its head, in that you had very governed metadata that was going out, but it was in a limited fashion. With Power BI, with desktop and the use of data sets, anybody could go and publish a data set to PowerBI.com, and there's no knowing if that data set was any good. So in an attempt to introduce some level of governance here, they introduced the certified and promoted. And it's as simple as identifying data stewards in your organization. Your Power BI admins define who has the ability to put these badges on, so not just anybody can do it. And then really all you're doing is sharing that set, and there's an endorsement area here where I can say, hey, this is promoted and this is certified. And when I do that, if I do that, those bubble up to the top. And I know that if it's certified, that this is something that's really sanctioned by the organization. I can trust it, and I can go ahead and build content off of it. If it's promoted, maybe I'm looking at the owner and I'm sort of saying, okay, well, they've at least taken some care to maybe vet the numbers and make sure that they line up, but it's not quite the same level. So there's kind of a 3 level, and then this, you kind of get what you get and you're taking your chances. So that's what that looks like from a data set perspective. Now, the pros and cons of that are that they're nicely governed, right? They're good to go. They're easy to use. They're certifiable and promotable. They should perform. Again, those data sets can connect live to underlying data sources or do imports. The imports are obviously going to have probably more reliable performance, because otherwise you're depending on that underlying data source. You get a high level of reuse. You get if they're governed properly, you get a reduced impact on those sources. Because imagine if you have all these people creating data sets or workbooks against transactional sources and running queries and imports, it can really highly impact those sources. And you have a better chance of having aligned business metrics when people leverage the same data set. And the cons are really, there aren't a lot of cons here, except for you absolutely need to govern these, because if you're pushing this out to Power BI Premium, Power BI Pro, and leveraging the service, and you just sort of let these data sources, data sets propagate, you can end up with some poor modeling and poor performance and the wild, wild west, if you will. So, but this is highly recommended best practice in the organization, assuming you do and use proper governance. So it's ideal for sharing data across similar reporting use cases, right? So think about it as the sales analysis that I'm doing, where I want to look at my customers and my sales amounts and things like that. It also uses that live connectivity. So when I connect to it, it's not very agile. I can't add other sources to it. So it kind of is what it is. And when you're here, you're kind of on the intermediate level of the BI maturity curve. All right, so the last option here, option 4, is data flows. Now we're moving even a little more upstream in the Power BI service. And the way to think about data flows from a definitional perspective is reusable data objects. In Microsoft parlance, they're called entities. You can really think of them as an object, and the most obvious one is something like time. And I'm going to show you how this works. Drilling into that a little bit more, you're connecting to a data source or sources. You're on powerbi.com, so you're doing this via the web, and you're leveraging Power Query on the web, and it is always going to pull the data. So think of it like a bit of an ETL job. It's going to pull the data based upon the model that you build and land it, or transform it rather, and land it in Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage, from which you can connect to it via Power BI Desktop. You can create a data set out of it. There's a bunch of things you can do with it. So to show you what that looks like, I'm going to go back here. I'm on powerbi.com, and I want to, I've got some data flows up here, right? So I have, for example, my AdventureWorks, where I've put up a products entity and a customer entity, and I can use those in reporting now. I've also put up a date dimension up here, but I want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go and create a data flow, and I'm going to define new entities. And in order to do that, I'm going to leverage the time dimension that's in my data warehouse, right? Because I've modeled this carefully. And I want to leverage it across my organization, across different reporting needs, because every reporting scenario pretty much needs a time dimension. And it has some intelligence built into it. So it knows that when I type in my database, right, it'd be nice if it actually had a little drop down here. It knows that my on-premise data gateway detects that this is a data source that I've already defined on powerbi.com. So I've defined this already. And from there, this is going to look and behave almost exactly like Power BI Desktop. So it's connected to the data warehouse. So you can see that looks exactly like it did. And I'm just going to pull in my date dimension. And then the only thing I really want to do here, just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to pick the table or tables that I want. I'm just going to pick the one, and I'm going to pull that straight in because it's pretty much exactly how I want it. And now you'll see this looks pretty much exactly like your desktop. So I can do all those great transformations. The only thing that I want to do here is I'm going to change my data type on this one to a date time. And again, it keeps track of all my steps for me. And I'm going to go ahead and save and close this. And it's going to go and pull that into powerbi.com, and it's going to ask me for a name. And in the interest of saving time here, I'm going to jump back over to my initial OLTP model, right? Now remember, I had done all this modeling, and since it's against the transactional system, I didn't have a proper date dimension. Well, a good way to make this model a little more high quality would be to add a date dimension, and a great way to do that is to leverage a data flow. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to hit Get Data, I'm going to go to Power Platform, I'm going to pick a Power BI data flow. I'm signed into powerbi.com, so it's going up to powerbi.com, it's getting me the structure, and I can go click on the workspace that I've been operating in. Here's my, my demo date or my dim date, and I can pull that into my visualization. I'm going to use the one that I published already. And I'm just going to go ahead and load that guy. It's going to give me a warning or not. And I'm going to use my date key, and I'm going to join that thing up to ship date. Or rather, I'm going to use full alternate key, right? So you can see that those date formats line up I'm going to say okay, create my relationship. And now I can go back to my model, and instead of using my calculated fields here that I generated, I can actually alter these, and I can use my sanctioned dates. Oops, I forgot to do one thing. So you notice here that I put there's sums next to all these. One of the great things is that it's really easy to iterate through your model here. And so one of the things I can do is Power BI wants to summarize all of these different fields, and I don't want it to. So I can go ahead and say, guess what? I don't want you to summarize this. Flip back. And that's something that in the old model could potentially have taken weeks, right, to make that happen. But I can iterate quickly through this. And then I'm able to use that hierarchy and use my official time dimension in this model. And I could publish this. This can become a data set. So you can sort of see the interrelationship now between modeling something against one system, publishing that up to powerbi.com to leverage a consistent data set across the organization, certifying and promoting those, and then pulling in things like data flows to give you nice reusable entities that give you more consistent reporting and enable reuse and governance and provide governance in the organization. So the pros of that are really, you don't have to, everybody doesn't have to go through the exercise of doing all those transformations and calculations. They can reuse these objects across different reporting scenarios. You get a higher level of governance, ideally performance is optimized, and it gives you a certain degree of agility. The cons are potentially recency and data duplication because you are pulling that data in and putting it into Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage. And so it's really ideal for organizations who are really looking to move from the desktop and scale Power BI to the cloud and to the enterprise, and for governed use cases. The method is only import. It's going to always pull that data into Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage, and then your connection to that is what it is. And your BI maturity level, congratulations, if you get there, you've reached the level of pro. All right, so those are all of the 4 methods that I have for you today. In the interest of giving you something to kind of take home and chew on here, or perhaps if you'd like to start a conversation with us about this, is we attempted a summary comparison matrix where we look at all the various types of connectivity and then the sub-query methods. So I demonstrated transactional, EDW, SSAS data sets, and data flows. We put in another 2 rows here for ODS or data lake. That's sort of sitting in between those 2 scenarios. And then the query methods under those, we identified where the model resides. So if it's in Power BI desktop or an SSAS or the service, and then you can analyze you can take a quick look at some of the trade-offs here, whether you're getting good performance, where's your cost, how recent is your data, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully this helps you sort of identify what scenario is best for you. Keep in mind your mileage may vary. We do have to make some assumptions in here based upon, we can't take into consideration every possible scenario or permutation. And then the last slide here, I'll let you analyze that offline because I don't have time to go through every single one of them, is we try to summarize sort of the best practices and use case by approach. So, and they do follow roughly in the order that I presented the information. So from sort of your least, best practice is a loaded term. Your least desirable best practice, is that a way to phrase it? All the way up to kind of your best practice. But you have these use cases, right, where you're going to want to do direct. So if you don't have budget and you need real time, then the direct query is the way to go. If you want to reduce the impact, then maybe import or composite method using the direct connection to the transactional system. So again, sort of roughly follows the flow of the presentation that I did here today, and goes from worst to best. So which is best for you? Well, the answer is really, it's some or all of the above, and it really depends on the size of your organization, the use cases, and is a balance of all those factors that I talked to up front. And this is an iterative process. It'll morph over time. You'll do your prototyping or your quick and dirty test case with your analyst on desktop as a direct connection or as an import. And then as you want to harden that and scale that to the organization, you're going to move into one of the other options. And that cycle, as those of you who've been in BI for a long time, you know that this isn't like an ERP upgrade or something where you do it and you're done. Good BI continuously evolves and continuously seeks to answer more and more complex questions. And those are the kind of things that we help our customers with all the time. So hopefully you found that interesting. I'm going to go through a couple of quick slides here on Senturus. Please stick around because I do have some great free resources, and we have the Q&A at the end that we'll get to real quickly here. But if you need help with Power BI, as you can see, it's a complex tool, both in terms of the desktop and the Power BI service, whether you're trying to get into Power BI Premium or you're trying to go from the desktop to the enterprise, you need training, whatever it is. We can help you with a mentoring session to help speed up your dashboard creation, reuse data sets, share dashboards across departments. You can learn more at the link below. That's in the deck. A couple of quick words about Senturus. We are the authority in business intelligence. All we do is BI all day, every day, and we're unrivaled in its expertise across the BI stack. Our clients know us for providing clarity from the chaos of complex business requirements, myriad ever-changing data sources, and constantly moving targets in regulatory environments and business requirements. We made a name for ourselves because of our strength at bridging the gap between IT and business users. We deliver solutions that give you access to reliable analysis-ready data across your organization so you can quickly and easily get answers at the point of impact in the form of the decisions you make and the actions you take. We offer a full spectrum of BI services ranging from building dashboards, reports, and visualizations to helping you with data prep, modern data warehousing, migrating BI systems, whether it's upgrades, performance optimizations, migrations from one BI system to another, migration of your data warehouse. We even offer software to enable bimodal BI and platform migrations, and as well as a full array of training and mentoring or expertise on demand. Our consultants are leading expert in the field of analytics, and they have years of pragmatic real-world expertise and experience advancing the state of the art. In fact, we're so confident in our team and our methodology that we back our projects with a 100% money-back guarantee that's unique in the industry. We've been doing this for a while, almost 2 decades. We work across the spectrum from Fortune 500 to mid-market, solving business problems across many industries and functional areas, including the Office of Finance, sales and marketing, manufacturing, operations, HR, and IT. Our team is large enough to meet all of your business analytics needs, yet small enough to provide personal attention. We have hundreds of free resources at the Senturus resources site. So again, this is where you can find the deck and the recording. Head over there and there's all kinds of great stuff, including past webinars, our blog, a lot of great stuff. Upcoming events, these are all free. Definitely go check them out on our events page on our site. Really excited about this one, complex aggregations in Tableau. We're talking about table calcs and level of detail calculations. We'll be doing that on Thursday, March 26th. You can go sign up on our site. We'll be doing a What's New in Cognos 11.16 about 3 weeks after that. And then we'll be doing a webinar on Tableau prep a week after that one. So definitely come join us for that. And then lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our great training offerings, whether it's for Cognos, Power BI, or Tableau. We offer a full spectrum of training across different modalities, whether it's tailored group in-person sessions, instructor-led online courses, self-paced e-learning, or in-person mentoring that is so critical with tools like Power BI. And then lastly, all of our additional resources here that, again, you can find on our resources page. We've been committed to sharing our BI expertise for almost 2 decades. All right, with that, I did run a little bit long here. We're at the top of the hour, and I know we have some questions.
We have a slew of questions.
We have a slew of questions.
Yeah,
all right, you want to hit me with a few of them?
Yeah, let me try to prioritize. And what I will say for everyone is that if we don't get through all the questions, we will definitely post a questions log with the answers on our website at the same link I provided in the chat window there. All right, let's see. So if you import using an Excel spreadsheet, does it auto map the columns?
Does it auto map the columns? So what it does is it will pull that in and it tries to read the data format. So if that's what you're talking about, yeah, then it'll pull up, like if it sees a date field, it should come across as a date field. It's a function of the quality of your data in Excel.
Okay, and one of the questions was how and where to specify the composite type query. And that we might need to take offline probably to walk through, right?
That's actually pretty straightforward, right? If you're in your model, you can click any given object. So first of all, when you do the get data, you saw that I had those radio buttons for import or whatever, but that sort of defines it for that entire query. But I can set it up right here. So I can change, for example, my sales orders to be an import, and I define it right here in the model. So I select the table and I select the storage mode. And you see the import direct query or dual. There's definitely some caveats around that, and it'll behave differently based upon what you do, but that's where the setting is.
Okay, and in Power BI, the prepared data function, is that considered to be ETL-like tool?
Yeah, so when you say Power BI prepare data capability, so the way they frame it is you do the get data, and if I want to further model the data, which I generally do, unless I go into the transform data. I hit the transform data button. And by the way, this is a new UI that they literally just kind of came out with yesterday. It's been in preview since December, but now it's the default as of last night. So when I go in here, this gives me that transform capability. Now it's no different than the transforms that you might do in an ETL tool. But if I'm doing direct query, I'm not actually pulling that data and landing it into Power BI, right? I'm issuing actual queries back to that system. This is a view of the data. So it only becomes, I would say, quasi ETL-ish, if that's even a term, if I do an import. Then it's going to pull the data and land it in a tabular model here in the Power BI application. So hopefully that clears that up.
And then there was one question, can you turn off the import function for analysis services cubes to prevent users from manipulating a governed data source, quote unquote governed?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of that capability. I don't know that you can, but I'd have to research that.
Yep, we'll follow up in there, Q&A. And then, well, this is very specific. June's asking if the data sets are sufficient as a semantic layer to your data as compared to something like Cognos Framework Manager. It's a pretty specific comparison to the Cognos platform. So
I would say it's similar to a framework manager model allows you to connect to your data and model it. Cognos is heavy on modeling. You're able to model the data, right? You're able to kind of model this star schema. There isn't a lot of transform capabilities. Data modules are introducing some transform capabilities, which are different than the modeling capabilities, but you can't do, like in Framework Manager, you couldn't do the fill down, right? And a lot of the data pivoting, you couldn't do that stuff. So there's a lot of transform capabilities that are here that don't exist in something like Framework Manager. But the idea that you're seeking to get to this virtual or star schema for reporting purposes is the same. So they have roughly the same intent, but Framework Manager, being 20-plus-year-old tool, comes from an age when they kind of assumed that you were going to do more of that transformation kind of upstream in the data sources, if you will, or you were going to build a cube.
There's a question: can the data flow import Power BI data sets? And I think the answer is absolutely yes.
So a data flow doesn't pull in a data set. A data set can be created off of a data flow. So
reversed. Okay.
Remember, I know I get confused with it too, and I have to think about it sometimes. So in this case, like this dim date is it comes from the data flow, and notice it's always going to be an import, right? Because it's coming from that data flow. I could now publish this up to Power BI, and it would create a data set. Which actually I did put up here. I put it up here, so now I have a data set that includes the date dim, right? So now I go up here and I can use that. So my data flows can't really leverage data sets, but you can go the other way around. So when I create a new entity, I don't really have an option here to pick a data set or other Power Platform. Now there might be a way to trick it. I know there's certain things here that don't flow back and forth quite as cleanly. Like when you're that and all this, you can't do all the stuff that you can necessarily do in desktop, right? So you might end up taking each one of these steps, writes an M query, which is their language, and I can take that. If I can't do it in PowerBI.com, I can always copy and paste the M query or SQL up there to accomplish kind of what I want to. But anyway, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but out of the box or kind of easily, no, you can't do that.
Okay, and we're almost 10 after, so I think I'm going to propose that we take everyone's questions. We do have a slew more, several more that we can address, and we'll post them, publish them up to our website using the same link that I included in the chat, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you everybody for your
you.
time and attention today. Appreciate you joining us. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, keep washing those hands, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Senturus education event. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.